Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're going to be talking about my Week 15 wide receiver starter sits for the 2019 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about some news around the National Football League as it pertains to fantasy football, then going over the matchups at the wide receiver position as we enter Week 15, then going over my top 36 wide receiver rankings. I don't know why that was difficult, but it was. Either way, we're trying to get to Week 16. We're trying to get to our fantasy championship round and try to capture some fantasy championships this season. So without further ado, before we begin, let me remind all of you, if you have not yet already, get that cursor past Stephon Gilmore, cornerback of the New England Patriots. Click that subscribe button. Don't forget to click the notification bell button to stay up to date on my latest content. And if you like today's video, don't forget to click the like button. Thank you very much. Hey guys, how's it going? Hope everyone's doing really well. All right, so let's talk about news. Let's talk about Thursday Night Football right off the bat. Lamar Jackson, as of right now, is expected to play despite that quad injury that has been making it pretty difficult for him to move around. But as of right now, he moved around on Tuesday, was pretty fine on Wednesday, and as of right now, he's good to go. There's no setback in terms of his quad injury that will prevent him from playing, so that's a good sign, and hopefully he will ball out against the New York Jets in Baltimore. Hopefully it's a blowout so that he can get some rest for the following weeks and potentially the playoffs, as they have probably already clinched their spot for that. Anyway, moving on the same side of the football for the Baltimore Ravens, we have the injury to Mark Andrews that's a little bit questionable. As it currently stands, I'm expecting him to play, but there could potentially be a snap count of sorts because he has a knee injury, because they have so many tight ends. You know, we saw Nick Boyle and Hayden Hurst both played pretty well this past Sunday against the Buffalo Bills. So there's always an opportunity for them to limit Mark Andrews in order to make sure that he's not really overexerting himself and injuring himself, because they need him for the rest of the season. So we'll talk about that tomorrow specifically on the Thursday tight end video before Thursday Night Football. So if you go check that out tomorrow, it'll be awesome. Outside of that, on the other side of the football for the New York Jets, another tight end that's dealing with an injury and he's going to miss Thursday night's game is Ryan Griffin, tight end for the New York Jets. He is going to be missing because of an injury. Also, Bilal Powell dealing with an injury and an illness, probably got it from Le'Veon Bell. He's going to miss. Speaking of Le'Veon Bell, he asked for more touches. He said, I am not touching the ball enough in this offense. Hopefully against the Baltimore Ravens, he can get another pop-off game. I've seen him in the past. I think it was probably 2 seasons ago, 2017. I've seen him before have 30 touches on the ground against the Baltimore Ravens defense. It was with the Pittsburgh Steelers, but I've seen him do it. Why don't we feed him the ball 30 times? They did it to Joe. Joe Mixon got the ball 30 times the other day. If you're going to trade Le'Veon Bell at the end of the season anyway, why not just use him right now and just try to pick up a win? Try to play upset special against the Ravens. Either way. In terms of other injuries, things that needed to be made, note. Juju Smith-Schuster and James Conner both practiced today full participation. Now, this was quite the surprise considering it's Wednesday, and typically we haven't seen these guys really get any sort of work during practice, and the quote earlier this week was that they're going to try to play on Sunday. The way it looks, if you're full participation on Wednesday, that's leaning towards, unless there's some sort of setback, that's leaning towards if you can fully participate all week long, you are playing this Sunday. So we'll keep an eye on that. If in fact that's the case, I will update my ranking Sunday morning as we typically do, 8:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on the channel, live streaming every Sunday morning. I will be there. I will have updated rankings for the running back and wide receiver position, top 36 of each. So we will get that under wraps as soon as that comes to light. Other injuries in terms of running back specifically, Josh Jacobs, as of what I heard earlier today, the Oakland Raiders made a statement that Josh Jacobs, as of right now, had his shoulder looked at, and it's not as bad as it was, assumed to be, and that he could potentially play this Sunday. And what I'm seeing around the entire landscape of fantasy football is people are somehow assuming, oh, you know what, Josh Jacobs is going to play this week. I got to drop DeAndre Washington. He's a waste. It's absolutely not. You guys don't understand. This guy, Josh Jacobs, said he was going to play all week last week. Didn't participate in practice, but he was like, I'm good to go on Sunday, and was gone. That could exactly happen once again this week. So do not drop DeAndre Washington, especially if you are a Josh Jacobs owner. That is far too valuable of a handcuff to drop at this moment in time, especially in the fantasy football playoffs. If you don't own Josh Jacobs and you really don't need another player, let's say, for example, you are in desperate need of a flex and you were going to put DeAndre Washington there. Sure, I might consider going out and picking up another player, but as of right now, I would hold tight onto DeAndre Washington because I truly do believe in this Jacksonville Jaguars matchup, he could potentially play a lot if Josh Jacobs misses. Could be a huge play. And we're just going to have to wait and see how this entire thing goes. If, in fact, Josh Jacobs continues to miss, because the shoulder injury is very much so pain management, we could see ourselves having a championship-winning running back that was just picked up off the waiver wire this week. DeAndre Washington, I swear, could really win a championship this year. Even if, let's say, for example, Josh Jacobs plays against the Jacksonville Jaguars. 3 plays into it, busts his shoulder, he's out, he's done. In week 16, if you have DeAndre Washington as your starting running back and you're ready to go in the championship round, that could be a guy that can typically, or in my opinion, win you a championship. I mean, there are guys like C.J. Anderson last year that came in and played in a good running offense behind Todd Gurley, took over, and won people championships. It's happened every year. Jamal Williams last year, Bilal Powell last year. There are a lot of guys that late in the season, week 14, 15, 16, off of waivers, win championships, and I think DeAndre Washington could be that guy. We'll keep an eye on Jacobs and his status. Other than that, a couple players missed practice earlier today, and I don't really see these as too big of a deal. Like Derrick Henry missing, that happens. That's the 3rd week in a row where he's missed a Wednesday practice because they're trying to limit him. They're trying to manage his reps and his snaps because, again, he's dealing with a hamstring injury, and he is that entire offense. So it's very difficult to try to push him, and you don't really want to push the limit on a running back like that who's dominating so much. As of late, we get some questionable tags on a guy like Julio. That's fine. They're veterans. Same thing with Devontae Freeman. They're both going to play. I'm not really worried about that. As of late, Devontae Parker has been on the field in a non-contact jersey. As it currently stands, chances are, with a concussion in protocol, he's probably not going to play this week. So that kind of leaves the door open for an Allen Hurns. But we'll talk about that a little bit later and where that stands. Outside of that, those are all the news and notes I kind of wanted to go over. Let's talk about some matchups going into week 15 at the wide receiver position. Starting off with the easiest matchup on the week, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Again, Kenny Golladay should be a monster this week. Like I was mentioning yesterday, Matthew Stafford, Kerryon Johnson, TJ Hawkinson, and Marvin Jones have all been knocked out this season for the Detroit Lions offense. And that's unfortunate, but Kenny Golladay, of all of those players, was the most consistent, has stayed consistent despite all the quarterback changes on their 3rd quarterback now. Kenny Golladay, in my opinion, should have a monster week this week against Tampa Bay. From what everyone has done against this defense, Kenny Golladay is, in my opinion, going to be hyper-targeted, should be a great play. I mean, worst case scenario, he gets you 10 points. Best case scenario, he always will have the upside of that 24-point game, which he has done many times this year already, and could definitely end up doing that this week once again. Moving on, the New Orleans Saints. They will be taking on the Indianapolis Colts. The Indianapolis Colts took on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and put up a good amount of points in terms of the wide receiver position, whether it was Zach Pascal or it was either Marcus Johnson. Both those guys had great games. Now you get to take on the New Orleans Saints, a defense that similarly is struggling in the secondary in terms of giving up a lot of points to opposing wide receivers. We could see another game from Zach Pascal. That was another consistent one. As of late, we have seen him 2 games in a row be consistent in targets, in his production, finding the end zone. That's a beautiful sign, and I think this coming week could be another good play. The Philadelphia Eagles. The only player I want to play in terms of the wide receiver position on the Redskins is Terry McLaurin. That's it. That's the only person that I'm interested in. And sure, as of late, he's been a little quiet. Last week scored perfectly fine. That's beautiful. I love to see that. But ever since they benched Case Keenum for Haskins, it's been a little bit of a struggle for Terry McLaurin owners. But the matchups are really favorable as of late, and I really do think Terry McLaurin in the next 2 weeks, whether he's playing against the Philadelphia Eagles this week and the New York Giants next week, this guy could be a huge contributor, and I'm hoping that he has a pop-off game against the Philadelphia Eagles this week. We'll talk about that in a little bit more. Then we have the Miami Dolphins and the New York Giants giving up the 4th and 5th most points. They play one another. Darius Slayton, Allen Hurns, Sterling Shepard, potentially Golden Tate. Maybe if a guy like Evan Ingram wants to come back. Maybe if a guy like Mike Gesicki. I know they're tight ends, but they're tight ends that pretty much run wide receiver routes and get it done that way. So either way, that should be a pretty higher scoring event, in my opinion, between the two teams. We'll see how that manages. The Arizona Cardinals giving up a lot of points. I think Jarvis Landry should be fine, as he typically is, because he gets a lot of targets. But Odell Beckham, man, he's just been... Odell Beckham's been kind of a buzzkill as of late. And when I say as of late, I mean the last 15 weeks. There's been a couple weeks that he has, big games. The Jets and the Miami Dolphins. Some of the worst secondaries in the National Football League. Arizona Cardinals are not shy of giving up a lot of points to opposing wide receivers. Sure, it'll be Patrick Peterson, but that's another LSU alumni. There's going to be some competition there. There's going to be some back and forth, and I think Odell Beckham Jr. could be decent this week, but Jarvis obviously is going to be great. Moving on, then we have the Vikings. Again, the Vikings secondary is just, it's really weird. Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, they should both be great. Then we have the Carolina Panthers, where, again, we don't know exactly what we're getting out of Russell Wilson, Tyler Lockett, or DK Metcalf. It's really been the shift has been crazy since like midway through the season. What happened to Russell Wilson? The last 4 games have been, I don't even understand it. He went from MVP candidate to who the hell is that, And it's kind of a struggle. So we'll see how that kind of manages its way out. And then we have the Detroit Lions, who again play against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Godwin should be amazing. Maybe Breshard Perriman, Justin Watson, like we mentioned earlier. These guys are, could be really good plays going into Week 15. And we have the Indianapolis Colts. On the other side, Michael Thomas can work that secondary, no problem. And then some of the tougher matchups. As we typically know, the Patriots, that's a tough matchup. But Tyler Boyd could be good this week. We'll talk about that in a little bit. The Kansas City Chiefs, the Chargers, the Bills, the 49ers. We all know it's the same jazz every single week. So without further ado, let's go in and let's talk about my top 36 wide receiver rankings on the week. All right, starting off with my number 1, Michael Thomas. Michael Thomas, despite starting slow on Sunday morning's game against San Francisco 49ers, the guy finished off with 15 targets. That's the most targets that he has seen this season by a wide, not a wide margin. He had a 14 target season or a game in week 10. Okay. But I'm not, I'm trying to overhype it, but you know what I'm talking about. Having 15 targets, 11 receptions for 134 yards and a touchdown is no joke. Michael Thomas has been the most consistent wide receiver in the National Football League, and his catch percentage, I think it's about 85, 86%. 121 catches on 147 targets. He's absolutely insane, and it's unbelievable at this point, to be honest. So as it currently stands, Michael Thomas, I'm 100% in on you, no matter what the matchup is. And the Indianapolis matchup seems pretty favorable in my opinion, so I like Thomas as my number 1. Moving on to number 2, DeAndre Hopkins. DeAndre Hopkins, again, despite this team going down very early, 38-3? It was a blowout, to say the least. DeAndre Hopkins was the only wide receiver that really did anything in this offense. Got himself 13 targets, 7 receptions for 120 last week, and that's exactly what we want to see, because when Deshaun Watson's going to struggle, he needs to find his best player on the field, and that is without a doubt DeAndre Hopkins. They did that. They found each other, and that was a great combination and a great output in terms of scoring. He had not put up that many points in quite some time, but we love to see him score or at least pass the 100-yard receiving mark, which he hadn't done since week 8. That is promising, and I think going into this week, sure, Tennessee's matchup is not easy, but the way I see it, DeAndre Hopkins got to step up once again, and he's got to have another big performance in order for this team to get past the Titans. These two teams are playing for the AFC South, and I think it's going to be a lot of the pressure on DeAndre Hopkins, with Will Fuller still dealing with injuries and all that jazz. So we'll see how that kind of manages its way. Moving on, we have ourselves my number 3, Chris Godwin. Okay, so here's the thing. Mike Evans is going to be gone, and that's unfortunate, but it opens up even more opportunity for a guy like Chris Godwin. Now, Chris Godwin last week, 9 targets, 7 receptions, 91 yards. Not an incredible performance, but again, still passes that 10-point threshold in terms of fantasy. Gets you 12.6 points, perfectly fine. I am satisfied with that, to say the least. Okay? At this moment in time, going against Detroit, Darius Slayton, honestly, whatever corner covers him, I don't think there is a good enough corner whether they move him across formation, put him in the slot, put him outside, I don't think there's going to be enough coverage to stop a guy like Chris Godwin at this moment in time. I truly do believe that Chris Godwin should have another huge game in this week. Obviously, he's been slowing down in the second half of the season. He's kind of looking or reminding me of Adam Thielen of last year, but I think Chris Godwin should be a pretty big play this week. He's my number 3. Moving on to number 4, Julian Edelman. He is on the thumbnail for a reason. I understand that he's currently questionable, dealing with a knee/shoulder injury, but that is nothing of my concern. I 100% believe Julian Edelman is going to play this week, and his production as of the last, I don't even understand, how many games? He's just been insane. He is the number 1 wide receiver of this team, and honestly, he is catching up to these other he's the number 5 wide receiver in half PPR. It's not even close. Julian Edelman is a monster, and it's just consistent. As of right now, popping off another game of 10-plus targets, 8 receptions, 95 yards, a touchdown. He's just a stud. And as he continues to be relied upon more and more because of the other wide receivers not being able to step up to the task at hand for the New England Patriots, Edelman's, getting the ball in his direction far more often. Even with the teams double teaming him for majority of the first halves, he just can't be stopped as of right now. Cincinnati's a pretty easy matchup in my opinion as well. Moving on, we have Robert Woods at number 5. Now you may be thinking, Andrew, really? Robert Woods has been on a fire. Absolutely been, he's burning down the National Football League with his performances. In the last 4 games that he's played, 11 targets, 9 targets, 18 targets, 9 targets. In every single game, he's had over 95 receiving yards, scored his first touchdown this past week, and also, to put it into account, Cooper Kupp played his least amount of offensive snaps. He played 29% of the snaps. Brandon Cook played 30-something, 34, 35% of the snaps, and Josh Reynolds played 66. Tyler Higbee, 97%. And then Robert Woods, 99% of offensive snaps. He's not coming off the field for a reason, because he is the best wide receiver on the team right now, and he has the most production amongst all the wide receivers on the team. Sure, Cooper Kupp can go score a touchdown, but Robert Woods is really, as of late, becoming that security blanket for Jared Goff, and it's opening the offense more because the depth of target and his ability to run after the catch, making a huge difference for this offense. He's been on fire, and I don't think he's slowing down against Dallas this week. He's my number 5. Moving on to number 6, Kenny Golladay. I thought about Kenny Golladay at number 5. I thought about it, and I considered it, and I thought to myself, well, Kenny Golladay is going to see a lot of targets, in my opinion, because of Marvin Jones' absence, and I think he's going to score a touchdown, but is he going to get more yards than a guy like Robert Woods? That's the question. Because they could both be similar, but regardless, Kenny Golladay is a beautiful play this week. I mean, last week, 8 targets. That's the most he had seen since week 10. It's great. 6 receptions, 58 yards, and a touchdown. He has scored a touchdown in, what is this? Oh, my God. Wow. He scored a touchdown in 5 of the last 7 weeks. That's pretty ridiculous. 6 touchdowns in the last 7 weeks. Pretty impressive. And I don't think he's really slowing down. I think this is a guy that is consistently finding the end zone. And now that he plays against Tampa Bay at home, I think Kenny Golladay could have another big performance, and that's why he sits at my number 6. We talked about it earlier. This is a guy that's he has the big play potential, but he also has a safe floor in this offense, considering there is really nobody else to throw the ball to. All right, moving on. We have number 7, Stefon Diggs. Stefon Diggs, again, even with Adam Thielen coming back, and even if Adam Thielen returns fully, I'm not sure if Adam Thielen's going to actually play this weekend, even though they're saying, yeah, he might. There could always be a setback. There could always be an inactive the morning of. And that's why I want to focus in on Stefon Diggs, because despite all of that, he's been consistent in terms of targets and his opportunity. Last week, 9 targets, 6 receptions for 92 yards. That's a great performance. Again, that's over the 12-point threshold, and that's a pretty good performance in my opinion. Sure, he didn't have the upside of a touchdown that would have taken him to that 18-point mark, but Stefon Diggs was still a great play last week and this week against the Los Angeles Chargers. In my opinion, yes, it's a difficult matchup. I mean, Casey Hayward is not a slump of a cornerback, but there have been receivers that have been playing typically well against this cornerback or this secondary. Courtland Sutton caught 2 touchdowns on him and had that the play at the end of the game in which there was a pass interference call, led to the field goal. Casey Hayward was kind of to blame. Then this past week, DJ Chark on 10 targets, had 9 receptions, 75 yards, and then he left late in the game with an injury. Was still a monster. There is a lot of potential, in my opinion, for a guy like Stefon Diggs to have another big week here. He's my number 7. Moving on to number 8, we have Tyreek Hill. Now, I have Tyreek Hill at number 8 because he really has been inconsistent. Like we talked about this before the season. We've talked about it even during the season. The volatility of a Tyreek Hill will always be something that concerns me. And the fact that as of right now, as it currently stands, he's probably going to, have himself an either 8-point game or a 28-point game scares me. But I still want to play him because I always love the upside of a Tyreek Hill, and I have a hard time leaving him on my bench because if he pops off for 28 on my bench, that's going to hurt me. So he sits at number 8, but I do like the opportunity and production of these other players above him to probably score more than him on a normal week, because Tyreek Hill on a normal week will get you that 10 points, and that's about it. And that's where he kind of tops off. But the touchdown upside, there's always a possibility. Moving on, let's talk about number 9, Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper, again, this past week, pretty good player. I mean, let's be honest, even with the matchup against the Bears, the offense struggling, still got a touchdown, 83 yards on 6 receptions, perfectly fine. He's a good wide receiver. That is not a doubt in my mind. The only thing that ever bothers me with Amari Cooper is his injury status. And now this week he gets Jalen Ramsey. That scares me. Gosh, that scares me a lot. Because Jalen Ramsey, as we've seen in the last couple weeks, has been locking some players down and not making it real easy for wide receivers to get any sort of production. The last couple weeks, Christian Kirk, bye-bye. DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, bye-bye. And now it's Amari Cooper's turn. There's always a potential that Amari Cooper could be locked down and shut out completely. I'm hoping that's not the case, and I'm thinking he'll be fine. He's my number 9 wide receiver on the week. Moving on to number 10, we have Davante Adams. Davante Adams kind of went AFK last week. I mean, I don't know where he went. I don't know where. I mean, somebody probably told him to go to the locker room before halftime, and he just disappeared. But there were a couple plays in which Aaron Rodgers threw touchdowns. One specifically that I saw. He ran an out and up Davante Adams, and he was wide open in the end zone. Rodgers could have waited one more second, diced it to him, had himself over 10 points, but he threw it to the tight end across the field. Perfectly fine. It's going to happen. Davante Adams is one of the best wide receivers in the National Football League, and this week, playing against the Chicago Bears, he's typically played well against them in the past. And I think Davante Adams, again, is another one of these guys that always has the upside of those touchdowns and always has the upside of having a big performance. And I have a hard time leaving him on my bench, so he sits at number 10. Moving on to number 11. Speaking of that Bears-Packers matchup, Allen Robinson has been on fire, and he's not slowing down. 4 touchdowns in the last 3 weeks, over 10 targets per game on average. His yard counts are always going to be there. As of late, Allen Robinson is dominating the National Football League no matter what team he plays against, and I don't think he's going to slow down against the Green Bay Packers. I mean, sure, the Packers defense has been pretty solid this season, but getting himself, 10 targets per game is no joke. It's going to lead to opportunity down in the red zone, finding himself with a lot of targets. I think Allen Robinson is a fantastic play. He's my number 11. Moving on to number 12, Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen plays against Minnesota. In the last 4 weeks, Keenan Allen over 10 points in half PPR each single game. Beautiful, despite lower target counts than we typically like him to see. 6 targets each of the last 2 weeks, despite those double-digit targets earlier on in the season. I think this is one of those weeks where Keenan Allen again puts up another good amount of points. Hopefully, gets more targets, finds himself in the end zone. Xavier Rhodes been slowing down this year. I think there's a guy that we could take advantage of. Keenan Allen's my number 12. Moving on, let's talk about my wide receiver 2. Starting off with number 13, DJ Moore. Yes, DJ Moore this past week was quieter, but he wasn't terrible. 10 plus points, 81 yards, 4 receptions, perfectly fine. I'm okay with that because there's going to be inconsistencies at the wide receiver position. You're not going to get a touchdown every single week. It's not possible. And yes, we got great performances out of him, but that is, again, 6 performances in a row of 10 plus points in half PPR. And I don't think that that's going to really, stop anytime soon. He's getting targets, he's getting good opportunity, and DJ Moore is producing on it against Seattle. I'm not worried about it at all. I think this is a great matchup for him, and he's my number 13. Moving on, Emmanuel Sanders. Now, Emmanuel Sanders got that rib injury and kind of was quiet for a good amount of time. Now, the question is the Emmanuel Sanders that we saw this past week the one that we're going to see rest of season? And I think there's a very good opportunity considering the matchups on hand. You get to play against the Atlanta Falcons. And Emmanuel Sanders, the way he worked, the way he was able to produce last week is definitely going to earn himself more and more opportunities in terms of targets. I mean, with Kendrick Bourne and Deebo Samuel as the other 2 wide receivers also catching touchdowns, there's a lot of threats on this offense on top of the running game that is supreme and George Kittle. So as of right now, Sanders, a really good play in my eyes against a very poor defense in Santa Clara. It should be a home game. So I think Sanders, pretty good play here as my number 14 wide receiver. Moving on to number 15, Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp scares me because I mentioned earlier when I talked about Robert Woods, he's had the least amount of offensive snaps than I think he has in his entire career, despite games that he had got injured in. He played only 29% of snaps in the game last week. 4 targets, 4 receptions, 45 yards and a touchdown. Sure, that's fine. But he's relying heavily upon touchdowns. The last 2 weeks he has scored touchdowns. The 2 weeks prior to that, no touchdowns, 6.5 and 6.8. That is scary. That concerns me. But I do think Cooper Kupp hopefully will get more snap counts, more targets this week against the Dallas Cowboys matchup. Another one of these NFC teams that really could potentially be playoff contenders, but a team that's that I think that they can probably dice up in the passing game besides on the ground. So hopefully Cooper Kupp figures it out this week. I don't know if he's dealing with an injury or what it is exactly, but they haven't said anything. But that's typically the MO of what the heck was that? Okay, that's typically the MO of the Rams. So should be good to go with Cooper Kupp. Moving on. Jarvis Landry is my number 16. Jarvis Landry, a little bit banged up this week, but like I've mentioned, he gets his targets, he gets his receptions, he gets his yards. Perfectly fine. Last week, 9.6 fantasy points. A little bit of a slowdown comparatively to the prior 5 weeks in which he was dominating the National Football League with, 4 games in a row of a touchdown, at least minimum. I know Baker's been struggling, but I honestly think that the Cardinals matchup for the Cleveland Browns is one of the better matchups on the week. So I think Jarvis Landry is great at my number 16. Moving on, let's talk about my number 17, Julio Jones. Now, I understand Julio Jones, you may have been wondering, Andrew, when are you going to talk about him? He wasn't even in the top 12. Well, there's a reason for that. Julio Jones, even though he has been a pretty decent wide receiver, has already passed 1,000 receiving yards this season. He hasn't been as consistent as we would have thought he could have possibly been. Again, getting 1,000 yards is not very difficult. It's only 5 yards per game on average for a 16-week season to get over 1,000 yards. So that's not a difficult task at hand. But the issue with Julio Jones is he has not scored a touchdown since week 3. Julio Jones is the Alvin Kamara of the wide receiver position. And if you guys kind of similarly see, he's almost ranked in the exact same spot as Alvin Kamara was earlier this week. In my opinion, it's kind of hard for me to 100% without a doubt want to play Julio Jones, especially into a San Francisco 49ers matchup. But you may be thinking, Andrew, Calvin Ridley's gone. He's on the IR. There's no more Mohamed Sanu. Austin Hooper's very inconsistent. They're going to throw the ball to Julio. Sure, they might throw the ball towards Julio's side of the field, but you have to understand that it almost makes it easier for the 49ers to know that there is no Calvin Ridley. And the only other wide receiver threat is Russell Gage, because all you have to do is now just double cover Julio for the entirety of the game with with Richard Sherman and somebody over the top, and you're going to find some success in at least holding him to his normal 5 catches for 60 some odd yards that he's done in the last couple weeks. So again, I'm just a little worried about Julio. That's why he sits at number 17. Moving on. We have the breakout player of the week from week 14, A.J. Brown. Against the Raiders secondary, A.J. Brown had a monster 33-point performance. And I do not think that that's just a one-and-done kind of performance from this guy. A.J. Brown has done it multiple times this season in which he has blow-up performances in games where he catches multiple touchdowns. And going into week 15 against the Houston Texans, a secondary that has struggled with injuries and in terms of just playing defense in the last couple of weeks, I really do feel like A.J. Brown, with Adam Humphrey still being questionable, Corey Davis pretty much not being in this offense, is going to be the biggest benefactor as we continue to week 15. He's my number 18 wide receiver. It shouldn't be too much of a surprise for many of you. This guy's a pretty good play this week in a great matchup. Moving on, we have Zach Pascal as my number 19. Again, another big performance from him last week. Like we mentioned earlier, we get to play against the second easiest opponent this week against the New Orleans Saints, giving up the second most points to opposing wide receivers. Sure, Zach Pascal could be double covered. They could try to bottle him up or at least stop the passing game, but this defense, this secondary, has been hemorrhaging all season long in terms of stopping wide receivers, and I don't think that's going to change this week. And I think Pascal's a really good play this week as my number 19 wide receiver for the Indianapolis Colts. Moving on, we have Michael Gallup at number 20, another one of these wide receivers that will show up with a 100-yard performance or show up with a touchdown randomly on a certain week in garbage time, in regular, it doesn't matter. Michael Gallup continues to get it done despite how much this Cowboys offense has struggled, even with games in which Randall Cobb has gone over 100 yards receiving, or we have a 25 rushing attempt game from Zeke, or Jason Witten working. Doesn't really matter. Michael Gallup has been extremely consistent this season and playing against the Los Angeles Rams. When in fact, if Amari Cooper is being blanketed by a guy like Jalen Ramsey, I do expect him as in Dak Prescott to look towards Michael Gallup very often. And have to settle with Michael Gallup as the main target. Is that a surprise? No, shouldn't be. And I think Michael Gallup, despite missing all those games due to injury, it was 2 games that he missed. He's still I think the number 25 wide receiver in half PPR as of right now, coming off of a 109-point performance with 10 targets. It's exactly what we want to see, and hopefully we can go ahead and see that this week again. Michael Gallup's my number 20. Moving on to 21, Christian Kirk. Christian Kirk, again, another one of these guys that had a pretty good performance this last week in week 14. Again, the matchup was pretty easy. I don't think that the Pittsburgh Steelers secondary is that good. Sure, they have Minkah Fitzpatrick and they're always scoring touchdowns, but their secondary can be taken advantage of, and that's what they did. Christian Kirk had himself a good game, perfectly fine. Now, here's the thing. Christian Kirk this coming week plays against the Cleveland Browns. I don't think this secondary is very good either. I think, in fact, this secondary is an easier matchup. And with Kyler Murray struggling as much as he had, with the absence or the non-factor presence of a David Johnson and a Larry Fitzgerald, the only guy I can really rely upon in this offense to get something done is Christian Kirk. And I like him as my number 21 wide receiver on the week. Imagine if he throws a touchdown this week, you know where you heard it from first. All right, moving on. Number 22, we have Courtland Sutton. Courtland Sutton scares me because the Kansas City Chiefs matchup isn't that easy, and Courtland Sutton is inconsistent if he doesn't have a huge, receiving game in terms of yard count and or a touchdown. And it's been very apparent all season long that that's pretty much what he's fallen into, especially with Drew Lock at quarterback. As of late, sure, the inconsistency has been there, but the target count is still pretty relatively high. This week against Kansas City, it's a tough matchup. He is the primary wide receiver, so they will send more of the pressure towards him or the coverage. And I think this Kansas City team, they're going to pressure Drew Lock, and if he cannot get the ball out of his hands quick enough, we could see a little bit of more of a disappointing game from Courtland Sutton once again this week. That's why I have him at 22. I still think he's a great top 24 play, but I'm just a little concerned considering the rookie quarterback and the defense at hand. Moving on, number 23, we have John Brown. John Brown's been great, and I'm not trying to say that he hasn't, because we all know John Brown has been a fantastic wide receiver in fantasy. In fact, he has more points than Julio Jones this season in terms of half PPR, but for the last 2 weeks, 3 receptions, 26 yards. That's what we've seen him do 2 times in a row. Yes, he threw a touchdown against Dallas. That saved his week. But this last week, we saw him not get saved so easily because of the fact that the Baltimore secondary is as good as they are. I do think his target count's always going to be there. His opportunity is always going to be there. And I think the matchup against Pittsburgh is not too difficult for him. I think, in fact, that there is a good opportunity we could see John Brown have a 10-plus point performance with the upside of a huge touchdown play, which even makes him a better play. But as of right now, 23 is where I have him, and that's where I'm pretty satisfied with John Brown at the moment. All right, moving on, Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel is getting work in all aspects, whether it's running the ball, catching the ball, doesn't really matter. I mean, maybe this week he's going to throw a touchdown. Truly, Deebo Samuel is working around the formation and really getting a lot of work. Sure, he hasn't seen incredible target counts. Sure, I mean that's a certainty at this point. But at this moment in time, I'm not really worried about that. I think the matchup against the Atlanta Falcons is just so easy at this moment in time that I have no concern at all. This past week against New Orleans, 8 targets, which was a great increase from the 2 weeks prior. Had himself 5 receptions for 76 yards. If I'm not mistaken, he had that rushing touchdown as well. Let me see here. Yeah, he had 2 rushes for 33 yards. It wasn't a rushing touchdown. That's what it was. I'm perfectly fine with that. As a top 24 wide receiver, I'm pretty satisfied with Deebo here. I think Kendrick Bourne and his touchdowns could, if they were to move to a Deebo Samuel or an Emmanuel Sanders, I wouldn't be surprised. So at this point, Deebo's at my 24. All right, let's talk about my number 25 through 36, my wide receiver threes on the week, starting off with Darius Slayton playing against the Miami Dolphins. Now, my concern with Darius Slayton is that when you have a pop-off week like that and you score so many points, 150 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns, there is often going to be a little bit of regression. And there isn't going to be a defense that just gives you so many points. But there's always an opportunity when you play against the Miami Dolphins that you could pop off and have a very good week. And that's why I have Darius Slayton as number 25. I think as a top 25 wide receiver this week, that is a pretty fair estimate of what we can potentially see from this guy. But we have to remember there are other wide receivers in this offense that could easily catch the ball and run those specific routes and score. So Darius Slayton, I'm not going crazy for him, but I think he's still a really good player, so I get my number 25. Moving on to 26, Odell Beckham Jr. I leave him at 26 because of the uncertainty. He's inconsistent, but I like the matchup. Will I play him? Only if, in fact, I am pressured to do so because, I'm worried about him. Otherwise, you don't have to worry. I mean, there are a lot of other wide receivers around him. The 3 specifically around him are on the waivers, and they're so close in terms of rankings to him. Why not go pick them up and try them? Slayton, Westbrook, Perriman, these are not bad wide receivers. But the only concern I have is the last time I heard a wide receiver, or when typically wide receivers complain about not getting enough touches or not seeing enough targets or wanting to be traded, a la Stefon Diggs. The following week, the quarterback is going to come out and throw the ball in your direction 15 times. And I'm hoping that's the case this week against a very weak secondary. Odell Beckham's my number 26. Moving on to 27, Dede Westbrook. I'm expecting DJ Chark not to play. He didn't practice today. And is that a surprise? No. So I think Chris Conley could be an even better play as well, sitting at 32. But specifically, Dede Westbrook as a short yardage receiver in the slot, getting a lot of targets from a guy like Gardner Minshew is a security blanket in the short yardage situations when he needs to get the ball out of his hands. So against the Raiders, sure, there could be a pass rush that could force him to get the ball out of his hands, but I still think Dede's a pretty good play, and that's why I have him at 27. Moving on to Breshard Perriman as my number 28. A lot of people are wondering, is it going to be Justin Watson? Is it going to be Breshard Perriman? I think Perriman, considering his usage all year long and the speed, the ability, and how he's produced in the last couple weeks, I'm pretty confident in him over a guy like Watson. That's why I have Breshard Perriman as my number 28 against the Lions this week. I think, I think he has more of a rapport with a guy like Winston, and that kind of leads me to believe that Perriman's probably going to get more opportunity and more production. That's why he's my number 28. Moving on to number 29, Tyler Boyd. Now, Tyler Boyd sits at 29 because I'm worried. I'm worried about the matchup against the New England Patriots, and I don't think anybody else outside of me is thinking otherwise. I think this is not an easy matchup, and it's never going to be. And the New England Patriots, I mean, they're pretty damn good. Outside of the fact that Auden Tate is going to be missing, John Ross is still there, could potentially get a boost. But like Tyler Boyd, he's a good receiver. He gets his targets, he gets his production. That's perfectly fine. 10 plus points each of the last 3 weeks. It's pretty good. But my biggest concern at this moment in time is if, in fact, he's sitting in the slot. I think he's playing in the slot 60% of the time. If he's not in the slot enough and he's not being used there enough, could we see him disappear this week because of how good this defense is? Potentially. There's a stat that I saw that the slot corner for the New England Patriots has given up a buttload of yards and targets and receptions and a touchdown in the last couple weeks. And I think Tyler Boyd, if in fact they want to take advantage of that, could be pretty good this week. He's my number 29 with pretty good upside. We could, always ranking subject to change, but I like Boyd this week. Moving on, 30, Anthony Miller. Anthony Miller, again, is the opposite side of the field from Allen Robinson, who's going to be a top 12 wide receiver, in my opinion, this week. I think I think Anthony Miller, his target counts, his production, his touchdowns, they're all trending in the right direction. Playing against Green Bay, sure, it's not an easy matchup, but I do think that this Bears offense has kind of turned the page. I think they've kind of found themselves late in the season, which is a little too late, but they still have an opportunity to take out a team that's leading their division and maybe make a run at this. I still think Anthony Miller, not a bad play at all, as my number 30. Moving on to 31, Terry McLaurin. We talked about him earlier today, mentioning that, again, when you play against the Philadelphia Eagles offense, the only wide receiver on the Redskins that I want any sort of shares in is Terry McLaurin. But again, I'm still concerned because there is always an opportunity that he doesn't score and this offense doesn't get something going and he ends up disappointing. That being said, I'm pretty confident that Terry McLaurin against this Eagles secondary can get it done as a top 36, as a mid-range wide receiver 3. That's why I have him at 31. Moving on to 32, Chris Conley. We saw Chris Conley earlier this season be a pretty good wide receiver for multiple weeks, in fact, to the point where we were pretty confident that he could consistently do this, right? 2 weeks in a row, he had 83 yards and 103 yards and a touchdown in one of those weeks. Then he kind of fell back to, being Chris Conley. His target counts decreased, his yardage decreased, his big play potential decreased. And this past week against the Los Angeles Chargers, had 3 targets, 1 reception for 7 yards. If DJ Chark is the miss, Chris Conley's going to have to step up. And I think with the targets going in his direction against Oakland secondary, I think there's a very good opportunity that Chris Conley could be a big player. Moving on to 33, we have Robby Anderson. Now, with Jamison Crowder pretty much being MIA and Robby Anderson stepping up and being the, without a doubt, number 1 on this team, I still think that despite the matchup against the Baltimore Ravens, he is a potential play because the target count is not going to change. If, in fact, you play the Baltimore Ravens defense, certainly you're going to get Marcus Peters probably guarding you. But in the last 3 weeks, we've seen him have 5, 10, and 11 targets. Had over 100 yards each of the last 2 weeks. Sure, there are easier matchups, but I truly do believe a guy like Robby Anderson right now, going into this matchup, is going to get his 10 targets again. And whether those 7 receptions are there for the 100-something yards, I think there's going to be garbage time potential for this Jets offense, maybe even early potential. Robby Anderson, again, this is a deep threat with speed. Could always have a pretty good week here. He's my number 33. Moving on to number 34, Russell Gage. Again, when Julio's on the one side of the field being double covered, there's got to be somebody getting open for this Atlanta Falcons offense. Matt Ryan last week had the most points that he had scored in about 5-6 weeks. Sure, 93-yard touchdown makes a big difference, but as of right now, Russell Gage, in my opinion, will fill in as that number 2 wide receiver in the slot position. And when Julio was out, this is a guy that saw a lot of targets, 9-10 targets, that could make a pretty big difference in a PPR format if he catches majority of them this coming week. Moving on, number 35, we have Mike Williams. Mike Williams has caught a pass of over 40-some-odd yards, 45, 43 yards, 40 yards in the last 6 weeks. He is a big play threat. He has always been that for this offense. And with Tyrell Williams leaving, he's had to, kind of lean into that even more this season. Now, the question that stands at this moment in time is, can a guy like Mike Williams against the Minnesota Vikings take advantage of it? Now, the last time we saw bigger body wide receivers play against the Minnesota Vikings, we typically see a Golladay score or we see Marvin Jones score. Mike Williams, again, another one of these big body wide receivers. But what scares me is his reception count. In the last, since week 8, 3 receptions, 3, 2, 2, 5, 2. That's what we've seen. We've seen very little reception count. But when he catches the ball, he is a deep ball receiver. He is catching it for like 111 yards, 69 yards, 76 yards, 117 yards, 63 yards. His receiving yard count is not that bad. But he caught his first touchdown in nearly a year last week. Hopefully Minnesota could be a good game for him. He's my number 35. Last wide receiver I wanted to mention. It's Allen Hurns of the Dolphins. I think the Dolphins have to score, and even if they don't, they have to have a wide receiver that's moving the ball, moving the chains. I think Allen Hurns is going to have to step up and do that this week against the New York Giants. I think it could be a pretty good matchup for him. A lot of wide receivers have produced against this Giants defense. Obviously, Alshon Jeffrey didn't get the opportunity, but I think Allen Hurns, an experienced wide receiver back from Jacksonville, Dallas, has an opportunity here with being potentially the number 1 wide receiver. Devontae Parker misses to be a pretty good wide receiver 3. Those are my top 36 wide receivers. Those are my week 15 wide receiver rankings. Thank you everybody for watching. If you like today's video, don't forget to click the like button. And until tomorrow, we'll talk about quarterbacks and tight ends. I'll see you guys. Peace.